Hello and welcome to the Hindu's Parley podcast. I'm your host, Samreen Wani. Last month, the government released a fact sheet of the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey for the year 2023-24. Now, the survey is important in the sense that it gives estimates on the expenditure by households on various goods and services. And understanding these consumption patterns, where households are divided into various fractile classes depending on their average monthly expenditure in per capita terms, this gives a sense of the changes in the general standard of living across the class divide. And another reason the survey is important is because it is used to derive estimates of poverty in the country. Now, this is done on the basis of minimum expenditure required to sustain a minimum daily calorie intake. Some have pointed out that national poverty has declined by 17 percentage points in 2023-24 from over a decade ago in 2011-2012 when it was 21.5%. Now, that's a massive decline. Research by SBI shows that poverty in rural areas declined faster and dipped below 5% for the first time in 2023-24. A Niti Aayog study early last year claimed that nearly 25 crore people had escaped multidimensional poverty since 2013-2014. Now, India's method of counting the poor has changed and varied multiple times over the years, and it has been subject to a lot of debate. Issues with using comparable data sets, defining an adequate consumption basket to determine a poverty line suitable for India, and non-availability of data for some years are all persistent to the Indian poverty debate. So, how many Indians are exactly poor? How many have been lifted out of poverty? And how far is India from realizing its 2030 UN SDG agenda of ending poverty in all its forms everywhere? PC Mohanan, former member of the National Statistical Commission, and NR Bhanumurthy, director of the Madras School of Economics, join us to discuss this very pertinent question today. Is poverty being underestimated in India? I welcome you both to Parley. Mr. Mohanan, let me start by asking you first. How do you define poverty? And is it being underestimated in India?
Defining poverty is not a very small thing to do, it's a very complex exercise. And we had a very stable kind of a definition for almost 25 years, right from 19 late 70s to almost 2005, where we had a very started with a expenditure required for sustaining the minimum calorie, and that line used to be that expenditure used to be updated after every round of NSS survey 5 years by the Planning Commission. So this was the official way of estimating poverty, and that was more or less accepted. But slowly over the years, questions have been raised about the issue of the right kind of data that is being used, and that's why the estimation of poverty is very sensitive to the kind of data actually use it. When they started the whole exercise, the NSS estimates of private expenditure and that came, which come from the national accounts data, they were very close. So there was not much of a controversy. But over the years, these two estimates have diverged so much that there were questions about the accuracy of the NSS consumption expenditure being used for the poverty estimation. So that is where we had these issues came up, and then government appointed a committee, Tendulkar committee, with it. At the same time, the NSS also started experimenting with the different methodologies to improve the collection of consumption expenditure data, and that meant using different kind of recall periods for estimating the data. So, because of all these things, you had a lot of different issues came up in the estimation of poverty. So, from almost after 2011-12, the government had no official estimate of poverty, nor any survey was conducted for a long time after that. So that gave up a lot of other kinds of estimates. People started using alternative estimates of expenditure, and then recently you have the multidimensional poverty index. So the estimation, the question of poverty going up or down now is all depends on what kind of data you are actually your conclusion is actually getting based on, and the position generally you take. So we have basically been claims from those like the SBI research team or some of the economists who are in supporting the government. Using certain data sets, they've been claiming that poverty has drastically come down. And but that is questionable now because again it depends on the how do you update the poverty line. And I think probably we'll talk about that later when you come to that. So that is the right thing. Now, currently, we don't know. I don't know whether poverty is decreasing or increasing. It all depends on what is poverty according to my definition or your definition.
Right. Mr. Bhanumurthy, how would you like to weigh in on this question of whether poverty in India is being underestimated, or as some experts like to point out, it's actually being overestimated in India in certain cases? Where would you stand on that?
Well, I think I'm clear in my mind that in the last 2 decades or so, there is a drastic reduction in the number of poverty, number of people below the poverty line, whatever the line you want to take it. What I'm talking about, the delta between the 2 decades is certainly very large for many reasons, right? For example, reasons like GDP growth, reasons like the kind of changes in the way public expenditure has been made in this country, or in terms of the kind of programs, flagship programs. You take any of the aspects of the household, especially in the rural area, there is a government intervention, either it is a central government or the state government. So, in terms of the policy intervention itself, will suggest you that India would have brought out many people out in the poverty line. Added to that, we still have National Food Security Act, which covers almost 80 crore population in this country, and still saying that people are well below extreme poverty is something. I think it would be a failure of the public policy, if at all, if it is happening. As Dr. Mohanan very clearly mentioned, over a period of time, we have defined poverty in various terms. And in fact, in your introduction also, you clearly mentioned right now, even the United Nations doesn't look at only the consumption poverty. They are looking at poverty in all forms, everywhere. I think what it means is that it has actually broadened over a period of time. Initially, we were talking about only the calorie consumption. Now we are talking about much broader concept. I think that is the way to go. That also brings some of the issues like Dr. Mohan pointed out in terms of the data collection, in terms of comparability, and I think that itself will suggest that we are looking at very dynamic concept of poverty over a period of time. And whatever way you want to do it, I would say that India has brought out a large number of people outside the poverty. Now, it is a different question whether you use Tendulkar poverty line, whether you use Rangarajan poverty line. You might get a very different numbers, but the delta would be certainly somewhere close to 17 to 18%. Even Dr. Rangarajan himself estimated, based on his own methodology between two rounds, he says that it's actually come down to close to 10% of, based on 2019 survey. So if he updates with the fact sheet that we have, I'll not be surprised that the poverty would be in single digits, either in rural or urban areas.
Right, sir. Monan, sir, since you've already weighed in on the Indian poverty debate before, and you've recently pointed out some issues with or with the methodology in the household consumption survey data, I know that you touched upon a certain issues in your previous answer, but I would like to press you on specifically the household consumption survey data that you have spoken about. Now, for the benefit of our listeners, would you please elaborate on your concerns that you have with this specific consumption survey data?
Okay, to start with, when the whole poverty discussion started, we used to get something now, the expenditure which the survey used to show as the per capita household consumption expenditure. And that and the expenditure coming from the national account, they were almost identical. So there were hardly any controversies. Now, over the years, I told you the divergence came up. So some of the issues were because of the recall period. You don't remember to report all your things. It's impossible to do that. So the National Sample Survey Office started experimenting with the different recall periods. So certain item they started a 7-day recall period. For certain item they did a 30 days period. So all of them gave slightly different expenditure estimation. Now, if you use a shorter reference period of 7 days or 30 days, you get a much better recall. So, but that's not comparable with the previous consumption estimate. That is the what came out of that. So we had one estimate called the uniform reference period, where you had 30 days and 365 days for durable goods. So this was used by Tendulkar, what he called the mixed reference period in MRP used estimation. So he did the poverty estimation based on that. Then we had the modified mixed reference period. That is 7 days you use for food items, 30 days for use certain item, then 365 days. Now, which gives you higher estimate of the expenditure because your record is better. Now, if you use the higher expenditure distribution on a lower poverty estimate, which is what many of the researchers have done, naturally your poverty goes down. So we still don't have a poverty line corresponding to the higher MMRP kind of thing. Rangarajan has suggested a methodology in his committee reports, but the government has not accepted that methodology. Now, in the last 2 years, the National Sample Survey Office has made a further modification. Instead of visiting the household in one sitting, collecting the whole data in one sitting, they do it in three sittings, which means the respondent has much more time and better recall, and the data recording is much better. So this will give you a still higher expenditure, the current methodology. But if you use this current data on the older poverty line, naturally your estimate will come down. That is what has happened now. Very few people have actually tried to create a new poverty line for the new kind of methodology the NSS is following. So this is the major gap, I would say. But you don't blame the researchers. It is actually for the earlier the Planning Commission used to be the authority on this methodology. Now we do not have any officially accepted methodology for this. Deriving the poverty line based on the new estimation. You only have the nearest one is the Rangarajan methodology, which is not accepted. So all of a sudden now we have a situation where the old data doesn't fit into the new estimation which the NSS was made it. No doubt, poverty must have gone down. It has gone down as by all other estimates. So this NSS-based consumption estimate requires the government should seriously appoint a few people for researchers to develop a new poverty line methodology if we have to use this data. Mixing up the old poverty line on the new data set is actually going to create a lot of confusing signals to the, you can, that is why I said it all depends upon what data you use and what line you use it. So the field gets open to all kinds of debate now. That is unfortunately the case. I think the government should seriously sit down and ask a few experts to arrive at a methodology which is acceptable to a large number of people.
Bhanumurthy, sir, do you share Mohanan sir's concerns there that there should be a concerted effort now in defining a sort of a poverty line, and his concerns with the existing survey data?
No, I think broadly I agree with Dr. Mohan. He's a old hat in statistical system, so he knows much better than me. So I broadly agree with him. But at the same time, uh, there is also need for improving the methodology. Okay, can we still go with that uniform reference period? Because we know there are some commodities, some expenditures will not be done in the last 7 days or last 1 month, or for example, last 1 year. So in that sense, if you look at the consumption basket, and if you look at the fact sheet that we have, the consumption items are quite different, compared to the old where we are only looking at the calories to 2400 and 1800 calories, that kind of a thing that we had. So right now we are looking at a slightly broader aspect of household, a broader aspect of consumption. In fact, if you look at the fact sheet again, the food articles is almost less than 50% of the total consumption basket. So you don't do that expenditures all the time. So I think that is the way, that is where, in fact, that also shows that we are actually developing, right? We are not concentrating only on food items. We are looking at other things, services that is required for the household to be, I mean, in a good condition. So in that sense, there is certainly need for relooking at that old methodology. And right now, what we have is certainly not comparable with the old methodology. But that doesn't mean that we should not be revising the methodology. And now, based on the new methodology and whatever the number that is coming, I think there is not much of controversy there. Rather, there is a controversy in terms of the delta that I'm talking about. You brought down so many people. I think that's where the controversy. But otherwise, in terms of the current method, like 2023-24, it depends that MMRP, whatever that we have right now, and it clearly says what it is. So the controversy is that you are brought down by 17 percentage point. I think that's where the problem is. And in my view, they are not comparable. So you don't take that 17% seriously, but you can still take that single digits more seriously than the delta.
Right, sir. Mohanan, sir, we know that the post-pandemic recovery in India has slowed down. We know that consumption, we know the state of consumption in this country. We know that based on various RBI surveys, there are a larger part of the people now who are saying that spending has increased, but not a corresponding share of people who say that, their incomes have risen at the same time. Now, I'm setting up this context to ask you that what do we know from all of this, and keeping all of this in mind, what do we know about poverty in rural and urban regions? And what does the household consumption survey data tell us about that?
Well, no, the data shows that the rural urban differential in the consumption is actually coming down. The rural areas are doing better. But I have a counter argument for that. The idea of rural area that we have is based on the 2011 census. We have not updated our rural area into urban area. So a significant portion of the rural area actually are basically in urban in character. That is my feeling. So basically, in any surveys, your rural area would actually imply rural area plus some parts of the rural area which are more or less urbanized, because we don't have a latest delineation of rural urban criteria. So I will not really very seriously comment that there is a difference, but the kind of difference that is the lower difference between rural and urban that has come in the latest survey. One has to keep this in mind when you do that thing. So what we say rural is not exactly rural now. It contains peri-urban also, a large number of peri-urban areas in that thing. But the fact is that you look at the rural consumption pattern, the items getting reported in rural and urban areas, you find these are quite the difference is much less. Earlier, the rural area, the food expenditure used to be the major item. But now, when you look at the items that is from the 2023, 22-23 data, you find that substantial number of items are the same in urban and rural areas, which means the rural consumption is actually has gone up in terms of diversity and all the things. So, but 23-24, we haven't got the full details data to look at that. So basically, as I've always been saying that we need to put all statistical base in a proper way, including a census, so that I know what is rural, what is urban.
Right. Bhanumurthy, sir, your response to that. What's the state of poverty in rural and urban India now?
Yeah, I think I read Dr. Monan's piece in Business Standard on this aspect. Again, I agree with him. I mean, in fact, before you go for census, there should be clear cut, separation of what is rural, what is urban, and what is peri-urban. Now, I think the argument that if the peri-urban, if it is part of rural, that is the reason there is a narrowing of difference between rural and urban. If we decide to shift that peri-urban to urban areas, I think the urban poverty would have declined much faster than what we are seeing right now. I mean, whatever the preliminary estimate that we have right now. In any case, at the aggregate, we are seeing a sharp fall in the number of poor. But in terms of consumption, Samreen, actually, you have to look at the kind of public policy intervention that's happening. I've been working on some states, I mean, particularly the kind of expenditure that goes for nutrition and other related schemes. Both center and state, there's so much of competition in terms of spending more on rural areas. take you just take one ministry of rural development, so much of allocation happens. Now it's a different thing that 30 years back would have told that this money would have not reached the beneficiaries, right? Now we do see that there is a clear transmission of those what are the intervention to the beneficiaries directly to the bank accounts as part of the DBT. So I think one way or other, both state schemes as well as central schemes would have seen a significant change in the way rural segment is right now compared to 20 years back. So that I don't think anybody should be contradicting that kind of position.
Right, sir. So, Monan, sir, this brings me to the next question. Where do you stand on an upward revision of the poverty line in India? I know you've also alluded to it previously that the government should get a group of experts to sit down and exactly define what constitutes a poverty line, rethink that idea. But are you in favor? Or are you opposed to the idea of an upward revision of the poverty line in India?
It's a very difficult question because poverty line needs to be estimated. But I just recall a research paper by three young researchers in the Foundation for Agrarian Studies in Bangalore. They used exactly the Rangarajan methodology. They replicated using the exact procedure suggested by Rangarajan on the 22-23 data, because Rangarajan did it for 2011 told data and then updated that. But these researchers applied the same methodology on the 22-23 data, and they got a very, around 25% poverty using that methodology. So the whole issue is I'm not very clear by updating a poverty line in that fashion, uh, what would be the final result coming out? Will we have and I can't guess that poverty will go down or up based on this paper which they produced actually. But all I said is that we need to have some kind of an agreement on, and that requires a government also uh, to stand behind that methodology. But that is unlikely, to happen now because there is no interest, I think, in these poverty estimates from the government side.
Right. Bhanumurthy sir, Monan sir says that, there seems to be no government intention behind agreeing on a methodology for poverty line. Where would you stand on the
No, no.
idea that,
In fact, just to clarify, even the UNDP methodology. I mean, if you look at where it says $2.15 a day poverty line, even that says even in 2019 the income poverty is just about 12.5 or 13%. Now, I don't know from where this 22% or 25%. I'm not sure even um, you know. Uh, Niti Aayog's estimates also don't really support that kind of a numbers. So 25% is, I think, is not acceptable in my view. Uh, but I think I agree with Dr. Mohanan that we need to have a clear-cut methodology in terms of poverty line estimation. But at the same time, if we want to stick to single poverty line, I think that is going to be a difficult task. You cannot redo the survey with 30-day recall period or MRP and all those things right now, because we all know that MRP is not a right way to look at it. Now, if you want to, if the comparability is the only issue, I think that will be very difficult at the moment.
But let me clarify. I
sure, sir,
didn't
sure.
mean that it is 25% also. What I meant was that the if you replicate the same methodology, you get this number, which means the methodology has to be further looked into.
Right, sir. Bhanumurthy sir, I'll just ask you a question, press you a little further on this. So the Niti Aayog's multidimensional poverty index that they come out with, they started it in 2021, and we have estimates from last year. Um, so there's a criticism levied against the Niti Aayog's way of the multidimensional poverty index. The fact that the UNDP's way of calculating has 10 indicators, whereas the Indian report has 12 indicators, which essentially means that the weightage of the various indicators changes. Now, the two extra indicators that the Indian report has is maternal care and bank accounts. And so, naturally, now when the weights change, so the count or the estimation of those with multidimensional poverty, that changes. Where do you stand on this criticism? Is it valid, or is it blown out of proportion?
See, UNDP is a one methodology for all the countries, right? I think it's only a framework which suggests that these are the things that needs to be part of your consumption basket, so that you can address the multidimensional concerns. But I think when it comes to countries, I think it is left to the countries to customize those methodology, right? Yes, it may not be comparable. Okay, same, you don't have same methodology with other countries, so you may not be able to compare your estimates with other countries. But I think when it comes to country specific estimations, I think broadening that basket, in my view, that is the right way to do it. No, you may be out of poverty, but you don't have bank account. You know, I mean, you may be out of poverty, but you don't have electricity at your home. So I think that is not the way to go about. I think we do consider financial inclusion as one of the major, endowment required for any household, right? I mean, that is how the DBT system works, right? So in that sense, wherever you don't have DBT, assuming that the poverty has come down is again questionable in my view. So I think these are all the kind of entitlements that Niti Aayog has brought, and I think it should not be limited to 12. Maybe it should be expanded, in my view.
Right, Monan sir, where do you stand on that? Bhanumurthy sir says that the multidimensional poverty index should be customized to each country to reflect their realities and to reflect sort of their estimation of the poor. So, where do you stand on that?
See, I am not very sure about that because the multidimensional poverty tells you whether you are deprived of that particular indicator or not. Now, there are in the current context, there are many indicators which may not be applicable to households. So, when suppose you don't have a child at home, then all those indicators relating to child are not relevant to me. But so I am taken as household which is not deprived in all those things, or I have a bank account. Now, bank account, I will always have it. Once I have an account, there is no way of me closing the account. So many of the indicators actually don't go down. I mean, once you have access to electricity or access to bank account or a good house or 8 years of schooling and things like that, these things you don't get deprived of those indicators in future. So they always remain there. So in basically, my feeling is that this index will never go up and the poverty will only keep going down because the way you have selected the indicators, there is no scope for the getting deprived in future. So that is one of the major deficiency. And then selection of indicators is left to you. Now, bank account is the addition which Niti Aayog has done for India, along with one more indicator. Now, bank account, as I told you, everybody has an account now, basically, so people don't get deprived. So most of the indicators in multidimensional thing, when you use it for comparison over the period, has this problem. It's an index which will keep on going down and down up to almost zero level.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, yes. Please
Yeah,
go ahead, Ms. Bhamati sir.
so the
Yeah.
same argument happens for housing also, which is included in the UNDP methodology. So I'm not really sure that is the logic of including or excluding some items within that multidimensional case. So housing is one of them, right? So once you have house, you don't remove the house. So I think that logic, I'm not really sure whether that is a way to go.
Right, sir. But for the benefit of the listeners, I think I should point out that the multidimensional poverty index, it uses indicators across three categories. One is health, education, and standard of living, and then of course within these three indicators, there are multiple sub indicators like nutrition, child and adolescent mortality, schooling, school attendance, cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, housing, electricity, and assets. And where India differs is it has added maternal health and bank accounts in the index to sort of suit, our Niti Aayog has added that to suit our the realities of our country. So I would just like to clarify that. Before I move on, of course, to my final question, which I would request Bhanumurthy sir to answer first. So after all this discussion, and we know that there are issues with the methodology, Mohanan sir feels that there should be a congregation of minds to sort of discuss and come up with one idea of exactly what's the poverty line, where do we stand on it, so that we can get some estimates on how far we are, what we have achieved so far in terms of eliminating poverty and bringing people out of poverty over the past years. I would like to ask you, Bhanumurthy sir, how far is India from achieving its 2030 SDG target of eliminating poverty?
Well, if you look at the UNDP recent estimate, it says that headcount percentage is about 16.4% based on the 2019 round of estimates. So now I think if they update it for 2022-23 or 23-24, you'd see that there is there would be improvement in that particular number. Having said that, I think uh, in terms of complete elimination, I mean, I'm not really sure whether we just have about 5 years to go right now, less than 5 years. So I would not think that we are going to completely achieve, but I don't think we'll be quite far from achieving that. Even in terms of the multidimensional poverty index that we have right now, the index is just about 0.069. So you have to compare to coming closer to zero. So compared to other countries, like for example, there are other countries which are somewhere close to zero point 0.2. So we are somewhere closer to zero, and I hope in next 5 years, again, the kind of expenditure that we are pushing on, I think we'll be very close, but maybe there is still a gap in achieving.
Mohanan sir, will be close, but there'll be a lot. There'll be a certain degree of gap in achieving elimination of poverty. How would you respond to that?
Well, poverty is indeed coming down because the kind of poverty which I saw 60 years back doesn't exist anymore now. Because you don't find anyone going hungry or anything of that kind. So on that, I think I have no doubt. But whether it will be zero or whether it will be less than 10%, but even if it is 5%, I would be very happy. I mean, nobody expect that to be 7%. But simultaneously, we also need to look at the vulnerability aspect. That is also increasing. Currently, we don't measure that kind of income vulnerability and things like that. So I hope over the years, as we develop a different approaches and not just go on to the number, 5% or 2%. And we have seen that there are enough methodologies where we can show it is 0% or 2% or 5%. It's all a question of selecting the methodology basically. So we need to look at the income aspect also in this concept.
Yeah, see, actually, why I'm more optimistic on this is that there are many programs we are actually leading to saturation. Okay. So I think that really gives me some kind of optimism that all the indicator that is included in the multidimensional poverty, I think we will be able to achieve almost all of them by 2030.
Right, sir. Bhanumurthy sir, Mohanan sir, thank you so much. I think it was a very important discussion, and it's something that we should be having quite often. Thank you so much for joining us at the Parley. I enjoyed hosting you both. It was a very interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.